Hyello. A project that I've been working on for a while and still actually am working on is my kitchen. Because I have way too much footage and it got to be a little bit overwhelming, I decided to break it down into parts. First of which being this, how to not redo, or actually keep this on the positive side, how to redo kitchen cupboards and what I learned along the way. The first I'll say is when you're taking down any doors off of any shelves or cupboards that you have to alter them in any way, that's a weird sentence, always number them so you know exactly which one goes where, especially if they are very different or different at all. Then remove any and all hardware from their respective areas. For me, this included removing them first from the cupboard itself, and placing them onto the floor. Well, these were literally stuck on when the paint was wet, probably, or just really stuck on really well, because it's like that on every single one. Oh, maybe not every single one, but most of them, even a little bit. Then bringing them down to an area that's actually feasible to work in and to take all of the rest of the hardware off. And again, make sure that you are keeping all the proper hardware not only together so you don't lose any, but also together in the way of knowing which one belongs to which attachment, like which cupboard door is going with which attachment. I did this with a watercolor marker so it was easy to rub off, unlike if I used maybe something like a Sharpie. Hardware to the left of me, cabinet drawers to the right, here I am, stuck in the middle with screws. Stuck in the middle with screws. While I did this, I noticed some imperfections on the doors, so I filled those in with spackle. And then it was sanding time. Also wear all the needed safety equipment and, you know, all your PPE requirements. Here's where my loss is your gain. I had numbered these doors, but as any type of marker, pencil, or pen would, as soon as I went over them with the sanding tool, those numbers rubbed off. So, my recommendation would be to use a piece of tape to write each number down on and then take the tape off as necessary, but adding it back on as soon as possible so there's never any confusion. Next up is TSP time. Giving all of them a wipe down with that, and then a couple more until the water was entirely clear. I left those to dry overnight, as you never want to paint over any wet wood. That's just asking for bad things to happen. I sourced a very sticky primer from a local hardware store and coated each of these back and front in all of their size nooks and crannies. Waiting another 48 hours for them to dry, 24 on one side and 24 on the other, aka 48. And started on the paint job. Now I'm pretty new to the world of painting, but even more so to the epoxy paint, never used it before. Essentially, once fully cured, this is a paint that is mildew resistant, scrubbable, and wipeable, so it's perfect for any kitchen cabinets. It also has a little bit of a learning curve to it, I found, as it's extremely thin, meaning I needed to put multiple thin layers on. Fast. Definitely read to your paint's instructions, but this was dried to the touch after about 24 hours, but took 10 to 14 days to fully cure. And after the first paint job, even longer, as the second coat would basically soften the first. I added 3 coats onto each, again back and front and sides, which is when another mistake of mine came into play. So I would recommend sanding each of the edges further than the back and the front were sanded, so instead of sanding down to it just past any paint, sand down further past the wood, or putting an extremely thin layer of the paint onto the edges. If you're in a position where pre-paint job the doors fit on perfectly, as the paint will add a slight to medium thickness that I didn't personally account for. We end up having to shave them down further and then put an extremely thin coat of primer and paint on them after putting them up to make them close properly. And between each paint job for the doors, I was also painting the innards of the cabinets again, starting with TSP to remove any dirt, grime, and grease. Wash it down a few times. And then get it primed, prim, and proper. I did do a test swatch of this just to see if the TSP would be enough versus TSP and sanding, and luckily for me it was, and it stayed very well, so I continued. I want to get it big enough for that.
Would you normally use a paintbrush for it all, or would you use a
I would use a roller if I was doing more there, but just to get the general.
Yep.
Yeah. But first let me take all the sneaky little pieces of hardware that I hadn't seen off. Okay. And again, using a mixture of a brush and a 4-inch roller, I was able to get the primer on in almost no time at all. That there are holes under here that go to here.
Oh, interesting.
I didn't know that. This hole right here goes all the way through. I do always allow any paint job I'm doing to have at least 24 hours to dry, whether that be primer or paint, just so I know I won't get any surprises. With each layer on the insides of the cabinets, I used a white semi-gloss as they didn't need the scrubbing capabilities, and a gloss or a semi-gloss is still able to be wiped down easily, more so than, say, a matte. And repeat again. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Lather, rinse, and repeat. Only this time I'm swiping and dusting first, as the last area was meant for clean dishes, and this is for food. And sometimes food doesn't always want to stay in its lane, or designated container.
Oops. Oops. "100% just got primer in my hair. 100%. Ooh, lovely.
Once every layer has dried down, that's where the organization process begins.
Keeping that one too.
Liler!
Just weird.
Here. Can you put that?
What, you're gonna hand them one at a time?
Yes.
No.
Just some food for thought, quite literally. If you do have any beans or barley or rice or anything like that, I would recommend switching them over to mason jars so they can actually be reused. You don't have to use it all in one go. And past that, keeping the instructions as well as the label either in the mason jar or on the mason jar. You can keep it on the mason jar with an elastic band if you'd like, and then just closing it off and using it from there.
Used to be my house.
Also, if you happen to have any satchels or anything like that a little bit loose and you want to keep any like ones together, I either use a bobby pin or I use clothes pegs. And finally, by this point, it's time to put all of the hardware back on, including new screws, as the old ones were, well, old. If you find when you take anything down that some of the hardware seems stripped or too loose, like these screws or nuts or bolts, etc., now that doesn't mean width-wise, but the length of the screw, meaning mine were 3/4 of an inch long, so my next size up would be 5/8. So as long as you're sure that it won't come out the other side with further size up from what I did, then you're good to go. Now here's where my mistakes come into play, because I had sanded down the numbers I had put on each door, and it had been a long while since I had started the project. Like I said, this took so long. So these had been moved around a bit.
Okay, so I think what we're going to do is we're going to put one screw at each. You need to put one screw in each one, then we don't have to hold it anymore.
One and then
One
two.
there, and then one. Okay. And then once they're in, that should hold it up. Okay?
It wasn't a definite answer as to which doors belonged on which cabinet, and it showed. But with the determination of 4 hands instead of 2, we got it done. We even added magnets to the insides, proper magnets like for door closures, so when they closed they would stay closed and be more secure, and that was that.
Okay, seems to work.
You know what we got now, hey? 3 doors down. We did this by mapping out the area with a pen itself and then adding on the first portion, which is going to be the magnetic portion, onto the inside of the cupboard, and then putting the plate onto the magnet portion, closing the door, and holding the plate with my fingers specifically because his were a little bit too chubby. And then pulling back the cupboard door to reveal where the spot would be for the screw. And then once we did that, we mapped it out once again with a pen, and to pre-make the hole, we simply stuck a nail in there a couple times. You might normally use a drill to pre-drill a hole for this, but because the hole was just so unnecessarily small, we decided just to use the tip of a nail and then screwed it right in.
Jack.
Hammer time.
Here's a little.
the end for now. Stay tuned for next video where I continue on. But that is it for today's video, and I do hope you guys enjoy it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys!
Oh, not that.